This is the reported account of Tim Hale's conduct on January 6th of 2021 and ultimately his conviction, which sent him to prison for more than 3 years. Former Army reservist and security guard at a naval weapons station, found guilty on all counts. Prosecutors portray Timothy Hale Cusinelli of New Jersey as an extremist who hoped for a second civil war. The government presented evidence of his using racist, anti-Semitic, and anti-gay slurs, yelling obscenities at officers protecting the Capitol, and later enthusiastically boasting about breaching the building to a roommate. That roommate of his, as jurors heard at trial, was secretly wearing a recording device on behalf of the investigators with the Naval Criminal Intelligence Service and the FBI. Hale did not dispute that he entered the Capitol. He, in fact, said, I should not have been there in his own testimony. He sort of pled ignorance about his presence there and the idea that he was potentially disrupting an official proceeding. He was not charged with assaulting police or causing property damage. He also, it was sort of conceded that he did not travel to Washington with any specific goal of storming the Capitol, let alone disrupting the electoral count. He didn't even realize that the Capitol was where Congress met, he said. All right, well, let's talk. These complicated, some of these cases are complicated, and sometimes defendants aren't always sympathetic, and this is where the rule of law becomes even more important. Tim Hale, 33-year-old Army Reserve veteran who was recently released from jail after spending, nearly 3 years incarcerated on J6. Tim Hale, thanks for joining us. Appreciate it.
Absolutely. Thank you for having me. Good morning.
So that's like the official Beltway media account of what transpired, what you did on Jan 6th, and then a sort of a summary of the trial and the result of that trial. Give us your version of events in terms of why you went to J6 and what you did on that day.
Sure. So, as I'm sure you or any of your listeners know, the official narratives around January 6th are jaundiced accounts, to say the least. The reason I went to the Capitol, or broadly we'll say Washington, D.C., was so that I could hear a Trump speech. This was theoretically going to be the beginning of a second term if he pulled a rabbit out of a hat, or it was going to be the last major speech of his presidency. And so I wanted to be there for a major historical event. I wanted to be there to support a president that I voted for. And I wanted to be there as a citizen. So I went there in a suit and a tie. I got there, I blasted down the road for 4 hours from New Jersey. I worked overnights as a security officer, so I was rabbiting, and it really was not something I was expecting to happen the way it did. If you look up the Stop the Steal rallies from the months before, why would you expect otherwise, So I didn't know there was going to be anything going down at the Capitol building. I didn't even know there was going to be a march down there. I just assumed it was going to be, Trump's thing at the Ellipse, and that was it. But when people got down there, I have cell phone video showing people were peaceful. And this is why, certain people like me were held without bond. It wasn't for the reasons they made up. It was because they didn't want the evidence getting out to the public. And so there were barriers that were knocked down a half hour before I showed up. There were people knocking barriers over before Trump finished his speech. And so when people like me got to the Capitol building, we poured through an area that was supposed, quote unquote, unauthorized, but most people didn't know that. And instead of an audible warning like, hey, this is a restricted zone, you have to leave, the Capitol Police, and I believe a lot of them were just doing their job, but the Capitol Police were unprepared and they didn't know what they were doing. So instead of that, they attacked the crowd. And most people don't know this. There were agitators inside as well. A lot of them were feds. You can tell just from looking at video. And so there's this issue of entrapment that the American public is now starting to realize. I'm sure you heard yesterday about Ray Epps.
Did anyone encourage you to enter the Capitol? Did anybody say, hey, young man, let's go this way. Come follow me?
No. And in fact, this is what's so disturbing about January 6th is it's normalized Brady violations. There's video I've got after my conviction that showed me trying to leave the area. I was in the scaffolding and I got bottled in. And so did a lot of people. How did
you enter the Capitol in the first place? By what means?
Basically, there's this bridge between the Western Terrace, which is where most of the crowd was initially, and then when things escalated, people poured through the scaffolding, this bridge. And basically, once you're in, you can't go back out, and so you basically have to go up. And so people were pouring upward. And there's actually a point where I stopped to pick up a flag. So, I mean, I clearly was not in any hurry to go inside the Capitol building. But people, about five.
Just hold on a second. Did you walk through an open door, or did you enter through a broken window?
No, I walked through an open door.
Okay.
And you weren't pushing police back on the time when you were walking through the door?
No, I walked through. There were no cops in sight. In fact, there's one officer. I think it's camera 0102 CCTV. This officer is flanked by like 5 photographers as they wait for people to breach that one window, the first window that's broken in. He pulls out some spray. He doesn't actually spray it. It looks like a photo op, and then he disappears with the photographers. So, I mean, it was staged.
Okay.
This is something the public has no idea about.
But so you walk through a door, an open door into the Capitol, and then what do you do there in the 40 minutes you were inside?
Well, I wandered around because, like I said, I had no idea what I was doing or where I was. I also, I believe, had a concussion from getting, so many flashbangs in my area. But I wandered around the Capitol building. I eventually entered an area called the Crypt, which is an area with a bunch of statues. So I took, some pictures with statues. I made my way into the Capitol Visitor Center. I danced like a nerd. And then the cops ended up, it seemed like they were trying to bottle people in, but after we basically ended up talking to the Capitol Police for I'm going to say 10 minutes. The Capitol Police admitted a lot of them were Trump supporters, and they didn't want to attack the crowd like they were. They made it seem, again, this is, take it with a grain of salt. I only have video. I don't have the audio, but they made it clear that there were things going on that they didn't want to do, but they were, quote, doing their jobs. So there was an element.
It was reported that at one point you interfered with a police officer trying to arrest one of the rioters. Is that true?
Yeah, I mean, it's funny, after it happened, I didn't even think about it. I completely forgot that even happened until I actually got to see the evidence. I think that's why they withheld so much of it. But all I really did was pull on a dude's collar to drag him off the ground because I was concerned he was injured. It had nothing to do with interfering with the police. As soon as the cops said back away, I backed away. So it wasn't me trying to interfere with an arrest. I was just trying to assist someone who was injured. I did the same thing on the outside of the Capitol building where there were no cops. I was in the military and I was trained to assist people. There's some video. Speaking of that, there's video that was also withheld that again shows me trying to assist someone who's injured on the ground. So I never raised my fist against anybody. I was just angry at civilians being injured. And a lot of people were. A lot of people who didn't fight the cops were still angry because of what they interpreted as excessive force. And that was a contributing factor to a lot of the, let's just say, the excesses of the day.
So how long were you inside the Capitol, and then why did you leave at what point in time?
I was in there, I'm going to say, from 30 to 40 minutes. I left after the police in the Capitol Visitor Center said they had to escort us out. And so that happened. So we left the Capitol Visitor Center. They routed us through the crypt again, back to the area called the Senate Wing Door, which is where the initial breach was. There was a second breach through the doors, and so they had us leave through the windows. So it was kind of chaotic, and people just kind of. It's very weird how things were timed that day. That as soon as they're about to fix the first breach, a second breach happens. But
all right,
I ended up leaving through a window.
So you're out, you go home. You're not arrested on that day. You go home. Investigators show up. They apparently meet your roommate before they meet you, and they enlist him to wear a wire, which he did. What did you say to your roommate that was ultimately used in court against you about your activities on that day or your views about political matters and what you were doing there?
Yeah, I mean, basically, I confided in someone I viewed as a friend. We weren't just roommates. You know, we were friends for 3 years. We worked together. And basically, I had said things semi-ironically, because that's just the kind of person I am. Not, you know, getting a serious statement from me sometimes is like finding a diamond in a dunghill, and they kind of knew that. What really happened is that NCIS was tipped off by my management. I told you I was the union leader for the security contracting firm that I worked at, and management hated me. They hated Trump, and they basically set me up as an extremist. So they basically sent NCIS to set my roommate up, to have me set up. And unfortunately, my roommate, and I don't blame him for this, he was about to leave the Navy. So his contract was ending, and they threatened to jam him up. I don't hold that against him. But he basically tried to record me talking about civil war and things like that. And it was ironic. And frankly, I have recordings of him saying the same things for 3 years. And this is what's so disturbing in America now, is that informing on people and taking things out of context in order to get convictions is going to become the new norm. Due process is going to be tossed out the window.
Are you sure Naval Intelligence threatened your roommate? Because the report is they paid him $4,000 to wear the wire.
I don't think personally, I think that's a distinction without a difference. I think that they probably bribed him a little.
It's an inducement. Yeah, perhaps.
Yeah, I mean, it's a shame, but I mean, again, they tried similar things with some coworkers. A lot of my coworkers tried to tip me off about certain things, but you know, it's very clear that a lot of people who were close to me were threatened with getting fired and getting punished if they even came out in my defense.
Well, so I mean, you mentioned the extremists. So that's the way that you've been characterized in the press as somebody who had a dalliance with white supremacy, who said intemperate things about Jewish people, who's said intemperate things about other minorities. So, but before we get to whether that's germane with respect to this criminal proceeding, because most of it was held out as prejudicial, appropriately so. But I mean, what are your views? How do you respond to the way that you've been characterized per statements that they're quoting you as having said about the groups I mentioned?
Yeah, well, it's twofold here, the answer. One is that they used some jokes out of context, and the other is that they made things up. As for the jokes, I mean, they literally tried to hold memes against me. You know, they went through jokes on my phone from a year prior. I mean, this is how hard they had to dig to try to find something on me. And I'm a satirist. It's not something I advertise because I'm a private person, really. But I mean, I've been producing satire since I was 14 years old. And one of the things they had to do was basically delete all my social media, so it would basically prohibit me from actually mounting a true character defense. This is one of the major ways that they were able to deny me bond. I think it's a four or five. Go ahead.
Right. Sorry to interrupt. But you were held over for trial for 16 months. We should mention that. But So again, you are not. I'm not putting words in your mouth. I'm asking. You do not consider yourself a white supremacist. You have no animus that is race or ethnicity based against any particular group. Is that what you're saying?
Yeah, no, I mean, I'm from a mixed race family. I know everybody does that. Oh, I have a black friend, but I mean, it's like that's, you know, you got to in New Jersey, especially, we're one of the most diverse states in the country. I mean, keep in mind, my roommate was Jamaican for 3 years. If I was a white supremacist, that would have been a weird situation.
Right.
You know,
You've
I mean,
been
Okay.
asked to move. Yeah.
Yeah, okay.
So during
was-
you spent
yeah.
3 years in jail, but you spent 1 year in solitary confinement, 23 hours a day. For what? How did you get that gig?
Yeah, right. More or less. Sometimes it was 22 and 2, but yeah, the first year was pretty rough in the D.C. jail. By the time I was out, the conditions had changed a little. But you know, the real issues in the D.C. jail, and this is not just for January 6th defendants. A lot of it is, but the truth is that our criminal justice system is just not good. The penology, the penal system really needs to be reformed. The D.C. jail is bad for anybody, and but for us, for January 6th defendants, there was a lot of retaliation because the warden hated Trump, and so we were denied access to our lawyers. We were denied discovery. We were denied religious services. So, I mean, you know, the Bill of Rights is supposed to apply to pretrial detainees. Pretrial detainees are the exception to the rule, and even then, if you haven't been convicted, you're supposed to have access to the same civil rights as anybody else. And that was really suspended. January 6th, people might not have liked that day, but the precedents that were set legally should be horrifying to any American citizen who values the Bill of Rights or the 14th Amendment.
Right.
How would you characterize what happened to you? I mean, this business of you being some sort of extremist or white supremacist, most of it was held out, but it seems to me, and of course I wasn't there, that there were insinuations or statements made by prosecutors that would lead the jury to believe that you were somebody who was extreme or had racist views. So I guess my question is, my first question is, did that happen during the trial?
Absolutely, and
it did.
This is despite.
So then my second question.
Despite the judge's directions, you know, despite the judge's instructions, yeah, that happened repeatedly.
So then my question is, I mean, the way this sounds to me, if everything you're saying is accurate, and for the sake of argument, let's say it is, that you had somebody who was excited to be there, it may be a little immature and saying some of the statements that you made previously and on that day, but you're being imprisoned, you're being held over for more than a year, then you're serving just under 3 years for saying some intemperate things that should have been precluded from the trial, that did not result in any action in furtherance of anything intemperate you may have said. That maybe it was satirical, maybe it wasn't, but you can't connect anything you said to actions you took, and the actions you took on January 6th were all of a nonviolent character. So essentially you were in prison for 3 years because you said some dumb things that you may or may not have believed. You didn't act on them, but they imprisoned you anyway.
That's right. And one of the reasons for, justice delayed is justice denied. The reason it took 16 months for me to get a speedy trial is because I was housed with a bunch of informants. So, I mean, you have the fact that they try to sabotage our cases as well by housing us with Antifa. I was a perfect case for them to use, quote-unquote, insurrection as a Trojan horse for destroying, obliterating the First Amendment and every other amendment.
Are you going? You mentioned the denial of religious services and other rights that inmates have. Is there any legal action you're going to take or contemplating taking subsequent to your release now?
It would be great if everybody who had their rights violated was rewarded, but my main priority right now, besides rebuilding my life, is just getting the story out of what actually happened, so that people know what happened that day that led to people doing what they did, because a lot of it was extremely out of character for most people. I don't have any particular legal plans. My main priority legally is that the obstruction charge, the one felony I was convicted of, is overturned in the Supreme Court. 18 U.S.C. 1512, which was
Right.
first upheld by informants in the district court. And
Right.
so that's the only felony I have. Otherwise, I just have misdemeanors. If that gets tossed, then I'm not a felon. And that applies to a lot of people. And that's really where, people have their eyes right now, is at the Supreme Court. It's a shame that I had to serve my whole sentence for that to, end up there finally. But, I think it was a worthwhile wait. I'm always willing. Like I said, the reason I was a union leader is I'm always willing to fall on a sword if that's what it takes. I'm glad that we had the wins that we had in court with beating the enhancements. But, this is a big one. So I'm praying for those that I knew, the good men that I met in there, and those who might be charged in the future. I'm hoping that the 1512 is tossed by the Supreme Court. That's my main concern right now.
That is a big case. Tim Hale, 33-year-old Army Reserve veteran, recently released from jail after spending nearly 3 years in prison for nonviolent offenses on J6. Tim, thanks for joining us. Appreciate you telling us your side of the story, and good luck to you.
I appreciate that. You have a good day.
Yeah,
Thank
thanks
you.
so much for coming on, and he joined us on our turnkey.pro answer line. Coming up on Chicago's Morning Answer.
Why a computer scientist quit his dream job at MIT.
But now let's head into the newsroom. Here is Mike Scott.
8:32 on AM 560. The Answer. GOP candidates Nikki Haley and Ron